Okay. And so what we're going to be doing in this class is trying to address some of these questions, primarily these. How ought we to live? What makes an action right or wrong? What should we do when we're faced with a moral dilemma? But we're not just going to be putting forth random answers. We're not just going to be speaking from our heart, although these are also important dimensions of inquiry and communication. We're going to be doing it by thinking. We're going to think very hard about what it is that we believe. We're going to reflect on our place in life, on the nuances of the situation at hand. This primarily is how philosophy is done and then written about. A lot of thought and reflection goes into it. We're not just going to accept what we've been taught. We're going to question some of our fundamental beliefs, some of our fundamental values, and we're really going to think about them. We're going to reflect on them, and we're going to try to understand why it is we believe what we believe, and whether or not that's true. And so, when you do the readings for this class and when you think about these issues, I really want you to wrestle with them. I really want you to think about them. I don't want you to just, move your eyes over the page, like is very easy to do, which I do a lot. But really think about what the text is saying to you. Think about whether it's true. Try to construct arguments for and against it if you'd like to sharpen your critical thinking skills. This is what doing philosophy is all about. Now that I've told you a little bit about philosophy, let's talk about this specific field of ethics that this class is going to be concerned with. Philosophy can get pretty abstract and pretty technical, and it is a difficult discipline because those who are engaged in it are trying to question and respond to very fundamental questions about existence in the universe. Such as, well, what is the universe made of in the first place? I'm wearing this shirt. Is this just what we might call matter? Just a random assortment of atoms? Is that all the universe is? Is there something more to the universe? So, philosophy is not an easy discipline because we're trying to interrogate some of the fundamental principles and beliefs around which our lives are built. In the field of ethics, the kinds of things we're going to be concerned with, again, are right and wrong, morality, justice, perhaps. And so we're going to be questioning those very fundamental moral and ethical beliefs that we've all come to through our upbringings and through our personal experiences. Primarily, ethics is the field of philosophy that's concerned with living out a moral life. I like to abbreviate with like that because I'm lazy, just so you know. Now in the text, they distinguished between ethics and morality and other subfields of ethics. We're not going to be concerned too much with those distinctions because we're going to be kind of talking about them all just throughout this course. Primarily, though, ethics is concerned with trying to express what rules we ought to live by or what principles we ought to live by if we want to live a moral life. And we're going to be investigating these rules, these theories of right and wrong, what it means to call something good, from a bunch of different perspectives. The first thing that we're going to do in this class is we're going to investigate what's called normative ethics. Normative ethics is primarily concerned with ethical theories or theories of right action. What makes an action moral or immoral? We take it for granted that there are actions that are right and wrong, moral and immoral. But what makes an action moral or immoral? This is the question that normative ethics tries to answer. And a bunch of different theories have been put forth about what makes an action moral or immoral, such as deontology, which we're going to look at first through the philosophy of Kant. Kant thought his deontological theory expressed that basically what it means to live a moral life is to live up to one's duties, and that the morality of an action is dependent on the principles behind your action. We can contrast this view with utilitarianism. Utilitarianism is an ethical theory that argues the consequences of an action is what determines whether it's moral or immoral. So if your action produces net good, net happiness, net utility, then that's a moral thing. But if your action produces net suffering or net bad, then you did a bad thing. Doesn't matter what your intentions are or your goals. It's all about the consequences of the action. Then there's virtue theory, which we're also going to look at in this class. Virtue theory is primarily concerned not with determining what makes an action right or wrong, but how to build a moral character. It's not enough to just know what right and wrong is. You can know everything about anything. But if you don't have the habits and the disposition and the character to do moral things, then when you're faced with moral dilemmas, you're not going to do the right thing. It doesn't matter whether if you know what the right course of action is if you don't follow through with it. Thus, virtue theory is concerned more so with describing the ins and outs of building up a moral character rather than trying to determine what makes an action moral or immoral. We're also going to look at the ethics of care, which I'm going to abbreviate EOC. Philosophy, historically, has been the project of old white dudes. And the feminist ethics of care tries to get us to see that it's missing the female perspective. And what the ethics of care argues is that These are all kind of, fine and good, but they're missing something. And that is a focus on what makes human life human. Relationships between people. So it's going to argue that what's moral is that which supports and maintains and betters our relationships, especially our relationships with those whom we're responsible for. We're also going to look at egoism in this class. Whereas deontology and utilitarianism generally both subscribe to this idea that there's an objective morality that holds for all people at all times in all places. Doesn't matter if you're in India or in the United States. What's moral is moral, what's immoral is immoral. Egoism doesn't subscribe really to that view, that there's an objective morality that we all ought to obey. But rather, it argues instead that what's right is what's right for you. And so it's going to say that you should do basically what's in your best interest. Screw everyone else. If helping out other people helps you, then good. But really the focus is on developing your own capacities, making your own way in life. And if you need to step on a few people to do that, well, that's bad for them. Whatever. And then finally, we're going to look at, I hesitate to even call it an ethical theory. It's more of a meta-ethical theory. We're going to look at moral nihilism, which basically says all of this talk about morality that we're doing, all of this squabbling and debating and trying to figure out what's moral is an empty and useless project, precisely because morality is pretty much a fiction. Like, we have these words that we use, right and wrong, good and bad, but when we use those words, we're not really talking about things that are actually right and wrong and good and bad. We're just talking about how we feel about stuff. Kind of a dim view, but we're also going to look at that. After we look at some of these theories of morality, of what makes an action right or wrong, we're going to then take a turn into applied ethics, where we apply these ethical theories to real-life ethical issues that face us. Thus, we're going to be trying to wrestle with issues like abortion, euthanasia, and assisted suicide, pedophilia, perhaps, treatment of animals, treatment of the environment. We're going to be looking at these issues through these different lenses. And it's at this point that I want to make something clear about this class. I am not trying to convince you, or I'm not going to try to convince you, that one of these is right. My goal is to just give you a bunch of perspectives, a bunch of lenses through which to view the world. It's up to you to decide what you believe and what you think is right after you've done all of the thought and reflection. So see these ethical theories, although the philosophers who developed them thought that they had grasped the truth and they were describing things as they are, view them as lenses, at least right now. You can decide their truth value later. In any case, I expect that this unit, this part of class is going to be, although maybe a little bit difficult, really fun. Because applying these ethical theories is always very interesting. Finally, the last unit we're going to look at is what philosophers would probably dub as meta-ethics. Meta-ethics isn't concerned with the more concrete questions of what makes an action right or wrong, but more abstract, kind of heady questions like, what do we mean when we say something is right? Meta-ethics looks at the status of the field of ethics as a whole, interrogating its grounds, its fundamental axioms. Thus, in our final unit, we're going to be investigating the status, foundation, and scope of morality. For example, is morality all it's cracked up to be? Should we really care about it that much? Should it have a hold on our lives, the strong hold that it does for many of us in this room? Should we always do what's moral above everything else? These are some of the questions that meta-ethicists look at. And so we're going to be investigating all of these different subfields and the field of ethics as a whole. We're going to be questioning our beliefs. We're going to be talking about ethical issues. And primarily the way that we're going to suss all this stuff out is through reflection and rational argumentation. Philosophy is very concerned with the development of rational arguments and justifications for our views. This is why on page 8 of the piece that I assigned for you today, they say, as human beings live their lives, they acquire a wealth of information about the world around them that they use to build up a collection of ideas about the world and their place within it. Those ideas come from a variety of sources. They may come from scientific discoveries, personal experience, traditional beliefs, the beliefs of those held by their society, so on and so forth. Much of the time, people accept these ideas without questioning them. They are relatively unconsidered or unexamined. A philosopher, however, will attempt to scrutinize such ideas about the world to see if they were based on sound evidence. Instead of having a collection of unorganized beliefs and opinions that may be incoherent and self-contradictory, the philosopher believes that a person's views should be carefully considered and organized into a coherent, meaningful, rationally defensible system. So hopefully by the end of this class, we all will have gone down that road a little bit further, trying to organize our beliefs, develop justifications for them, and understand and be able to analyze the different arguments that have been put forth in the history of philosophy in this field, and about what this field has to say about how we ought to live our lives. Thus, in this class, we're going to attempt a lot to engage in rationalization, to look at ethical theories and apply them to ethical issues, and to interrogate whether we have good evidence for our ethical beliefs. We are going to test moral arguments against reality, against our own intuitions, and against reason. And we're going to test moral arguments for soundness and validity. Does anybody know the difference between a valid argument and a sound argument? You've heard these words before, right? Yeah.
Isn't it like when you have a sound argument, you have like evidence to back it
close. It's a very small distinction, but it's an important one. A valid argument is an argument that is true if its premises are true. So, for example, here's a valid argument. Premise 1, the moon is made of cheese. Premise 2, if the moon is made of cheese, I'm a cow. What's the conclusion of this argument? I'm a cow, right, yeah. This is a valid argument. Because if the premises are true, then the conclusion is true. But these premises aren't true, right? The moon isn't made of cheese. This would be an example of a valid argument. So we want our arguments to be valid. But what's more than this is we want our arguments to be sound. Sound arguments are both valid and their premises are true. For example, here's a sound argument. Premise 1, all men are mortal. Premise 2, Socrates is a man. So what's the conclusion of this argument?
Socrates is mortal.
That's right, yeah. This is a sound argument, right? All people, or all men, whatever, are mortal. We all die. Socrates was a dude. We know that he died. We're going to be trying to construct sound arguments, although that's very hard, as we'll see. But I think this distinction will be helpful going forward as we look at these different ethical theories, as we look at these different arguments for what makes an action right or wrong. Does anybody have any questions so far? I hope you're getting a better sense of what this class is going to be like and the kind of things that we're going to be doing and thinking about. I just now want to give a little bit more of an overview of this class specifically. We talked about the nature of philosophy. We talked about the nature of ethics that this class is going to be concerned with. But these are kind of still a little bit abstract. Let's get a little bit more concrete and talk about our class, what we're going to be doing in this class. As I've stated before, we're going to be doing primarily three things in this class. We're going to look at and analyze ethical theories. We're going to apply those ethical theories to ethical issues. And then we're going to take kind of a more abstract, wide picture scope, and we're going to investigate the status of ethics as a whole. there are many reasons why we're doing these things. One of them is, I find this to be a very enjoyable way of structuring class. But also, it's going to give us experience, it's going to give us practice wrestling with ethical issues. You're going to be facing ethical issues throughout your life. Moral dilemmas that face you on account of the duties you have to people, how your conscience weighs on you, what you feel that the world should be like. All of these different forces are going to be pressing on you. And if you can't mediate between different calls to action, different prompts for action, your life is going to be a lot harder than it needs to be. So we're doing all this not only because it's enjoyable, but because we want to sharpen our critical thinking skills, and hopefully we also want to become better people. I don't think I'm the only one in this room who feels like they are not all that they could be. Studying ethics, studying morality, is one way of helping us along that path. And so you're going to learn a lot about different ethical theories and how to apply them. We're going to, again, sharpen our reasoning skills. And hopefully, strengthen each one of your ability to write well and express yourself. And hopefully, become better people. Although, as we'll see, and as I've kind of remarked already, knowledge alone isn't going to get you there. If you want to be a good person, you got to work at it. And as Aristotle would argue, you have to develop the kind of character such that when you're faced with a moral issue, you will naturally do the right thing, which is very hard to do. But we'll talk more about that later. Does anybody have any questions about this? Is it making sense? All right. Should we go through the syllabus now? Figure out what y'all want to read and discuss? Would everyone please pull up the syllabus if they can on their device or mobile phone or whatever? We'll be talking through it, but it also helps to be able to have it in front of you. So unfortunately, I don't give you very many options to choose from in the first unit, but that's mostly because we're kind of laying a groundwork for what we're going to be discussing and thinking about in this class. But y'all do have a lot of options in the second unit. So we're going to begin the second unit of applied ethics by talking about animal ethics, how we ought to treat animals. But then, y'all have a choice. We can either look at Judith Jarvis Thomson's essay, A Defense of Abortion, in which she gives her famous violinist thought experiment. Or we can look at a piece by James Rachel's, in which he says the distinction between active and passive euthanasia is basically dumb. So do you want to investigate the morality of euthanizing people for various reasons, or abortion? All right, who wants to read about abortion? Raise your hand. One person, two, three. Don't be shy. Okay, who wants to read about euthanasia? All right, I think the euthanasists have it. All right, what do we have next? Okay, this is an interesting one. We could either look at a piece by Barry S. Collar in which he tries to summarize the current ethical debates surrounding human genome editing, whether it's moral, whether we ought to engage in it, what the dangers are of it, whether we ought to support it. Or we could look at A Defense of Eugenics by Jonathan Anomaly. Weird last name, right? In which he argues that we have a moral duty to be, I don't know, what you might call eugenicist light. And society has a moral duty to produce people that are good and healthy, that are going to keep the whole show going. So, do you have a question?
Yeah, what is eugenics?
Eugenics is the idea that we ought to play a more formative role in how babies come out and whether they have disease and whether or not they have disability and things. A lot of the Nazis were eugenicists. And eugenics has been cast in a bad light ever since then. So do you want to discuss human genome editing or eugenics? Human genome editing, people? Okay, how about eugenics? All right, I think we're going with human genome editing. Sorry, eugenics people. Not saying you support it. You don't have a choice about this one, but then we're going to be talking about genital mutilation and circumcision. Did you know that male circumcision is the most performed surgery in the U.S.? Is it moral? Is it legal? That's what we're going to be looking at in that piece. Then we have a discussion day and another choice before us. We can read a feminist piece by Helen Longino in which she argues that distribution and consumption and production of pornography is immoral and oppressive to women. We should get away from it. Or we can read an analysis of pedophilia. Is pedophilia immoral? Is there a moral difference between having an attraction to a child and actually having sex with a child? Should we support one and not the other? So, pornography. Who wants to read about pornography and the ethics of pornography? I know, it's funny to talk about. All right, who wants to read about pedophilia? All right, I think pedophilia wins here. These are controversial issues, I know. And I have intentionally chosen pieces that I think are provocative because I want y'all to question your beliefs. I want you to really think about this stuff and wrestle with it. And if we can't talk about this stuff, how are we going to change things? You know, we have to at least be able to talk about it. The next choice is probably the most provocative, and it's a really hot button political issue today. Would you all like to read a piece by a former Olympic swimmer in which she argues that transgender women should not be allowed to compete against biological women in women's sports? Or would you like to read a piece arguing that there's a real moral case that countries should put a limit on how many immigrants can come into their country. Transgender sports? Wow, I think that is the overwhelming winner. All right. Yeah, I guess immigration isn't all that interesting. It's not a very exciting piece. Okay. And then the final choice in this unit that is before y'all, we can read a piece by Jonathan Rauch in which he argues that free speech, incendiary, prejudicial speech ought to be protected. We shouldn't place any limits on this kind of speech. Or would you like to read a piece in which Celia Wolf-Devine argues that certain affirmative action policies are both immoral and illegal and should be done away with? Free speech piece? Okay, how about affirmative action piece? I think there are some people who aren't voting. All right, we're going to go with the free speech piece. I'd like to remind you, though, as we discuss this stuff, as you read about it, as we provide arguments for and against these different positions, to try to maintain respect for myself and your fellow students, right? Please, I don't want you to be afraid to express your opinion, even though this is a larger room. You might worry about people ganging up on you or something. But it's important that we discuss this stuff. It's important that we think about this stuff. I'm not going to be trying to push you in one direction or another, but I am going to push you to think about it and to talk about it. Finally, we're going to end our second unit by talking about environmental ethics, which I think is actually a really cool piece. And I'm excited to look at that with y'all. Does anybody have any questions about the layout of the class or what we're going to be studying? No? We're all good so far? Okay, cool. Before I move on, I'd just like to remind you that you do have an assignment due this Sunday, right? I believe it's the first writing assignment. It's like a stream of consciousness journal thing. Basically, what I'm looking for in that piece is I want you all to answer the questions honestly and authentically to the best of your ability. The more that you write, the better. If you just turn in, for this specific assignment, there's not a word limit or a word minimum. But if you just turn in a page, you're not going to get that great of a grade because I could tell you didn't really answer the questions. So just like write as if you were writing a journal entry, although maybe don't, share everything that you would put in your own personal journal, unless you want to. It doesn't bother me, but I want to get to know y'all a little bit better, and I think this is just a great preliminary step in getting you used to expressing your thoughts and your emotions in writing.
So the 2 pages be like common good,
It'll be fine. If you get like 3 or 4, that would be even better. Yeah.
Word or Google Docs?
I think I have it set up on Canvas that you can upload a file. Doesn't matter if it comes from Word or Google Docs or if it's, I don't think it matters if it's a PDF either. All of those file formats should be fine. But look at the writing assignment instructions, especially for the other writing assignments, because those will give you explicit instructions on, font and formatting and line spacing and all this stuff that I hope to see. Sound good? Okay, cool. To kind of cap off class here, why don't we discuss an ethical issue? It'll be a fun exercise for the rest of this class. Does anybody have an ethical issue that they've been thinking about? Or an ethical dilemma that has been facing them that they would like to discuss? No, your lives are just perfect. Everything's going great. Did you have something? So the wage gap? What do we all think about that? Certainly you all have some personal opinions. Yeah.
Is this like in general or in sports?
Good question. Yeah. Maybe we can talk about it in sports. Maybe between NBA players and WNBA players. Is it unfair that WNBA players get paid a lot less than NBA players?
I think so, yeah.
You think so? Why do you think so?
I mean, I just think it's kind of messed up because it's their livelihood, and they make significantly less than amount than an NBA player. Granted, NBA they do better and they do perform better, but I still think it's fucked up that they get less. They
Okay.
deserve more because they work hard.
Got it. Yeah.
I think the way to look at it is I don't know the percentages exactly, but the NBA brings in a lot more money. So just based off of that, they're able to pay a lot more. The NBA and the WNBA just wouldn't be able to afford the contracts that the NBA can.
Okay. Is it good or desirable that it is that way?
No, but until I guess the dynamic would need to shift, because if they don't have the money to pay the players, they can't pay the players, and that's just it. There's nothing they can do. I mean, if their viewership goes up and you can do that dynamic shift where people want to watch it and watch it more, then yeah. But
Right.
I don't, like I said, I don't know the percentages of what they make compared to the revenue of the sport, but I know the NBA just baseline's a lot higher.
Does anybody know how much an average WNBA player makes? Do you know?
Like 30K.
30K? That's not a lot at all. Wow. Is that really how? I'm going to write that down.
It says it has an average salary of $7.5 million.
7.5 million? What a slash. It's either 30K or something.
It says around 120 with a high of 200 or more for WNBA.
1,000 or million?
120,000 with a high of 200. And that's from Yahoo Finance for the last year. Not 2 million, 200,000.
Oh, okay. Okay.
The 7.3 million is for the male players.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So yeah.
So is it 7.5 or about 7?
Yeah. 7.3.
So this is a little low, this 30K?
A little.
Well, I don't mean like obviously I want people to get paid more than that, but as for the the empirical evidence, it's closer to this. Probably, I don't know. Let's just say for the sake of argument. Let's go with the low end. Let's just keep it at the low end. So these sports leagues, right, they function a lot as entertainment. As has been said, the kind of revenue that they bring in depends on viewership, right? Maybe that, it's not desirable that there is such a discrepancy between these. Is it fair? Is it unfair?
So I don't know, I'm from Chicago. The Chicago Sky won the championship or whatever this past year, And one of my friends, like, she was really a big fan. I went to go get her a jersey, their new jersey. I think to this day, you still cannot buy, like, any other merch for, like, the Chicago Sky other than, like, the basic, like, t-shirt. So I don't even think that they have, like, they're not pushing to put, like, to get money through, like, merch and stuff. Like, you still can't buy. Like, and they won the championship, like, they did the thing, so you still can't buy, like, anything from it. So I think that, like, if they were to do something like that, like, talk about revenue getting in, sell some shit, like.
So I wonder, yeah, you said that they won, right? So you would think maybe they'd have the money to make that economic move.
Even if I went to go, like, into, like, they have, like, merch, like, Chicago sports teams, things you can't buy, like, any Chicago Sky stuff. And they won, like, that, like, last year. You can't buy anything.
So, I guess the question then becomes, is this an economic strategy that they're not employing, or is it evidence that they're being oppressed?
Wait.
Then they don't have money in the first place.
Well, does anyone notice how the NBA like consistently advertise on almost all the biggest news platforms? Like, I'm not a big sports person. I don't really know much about sports, but I see all this talk about the NBA rather than the WNBA. So I don't know. It's something also that I see, but I'm not a sports person, so I don't know.
So yeah, the extent and the nature to which even these different leagues are communicated about would certainly have an effect on,
and sponsors as well.
Sponsors and player salaries, all that stuff. Yeah, it's an interesting thing to think about.
I think sports is mostly like football, basketball are really directed towards men, and people just find more enjoyment from men because they deem like women as being like weak within that field. So that's why people don't get entertainment from the women and more so from the men, because I feel like if they did have more money, they would pretty much be getting the same sort of like practicing in, and it probably would be better if they had more money. Which is like a factor, I feel like.
So it's kind of like one element of it is they don't really have a lot of money to put back into making the sport more exciting or more accessible, or that could be true. Here's a spicy question. Spicy, yeah. I really love spicy foods. I don't know why I said that. Is it more enjoyable to watch a WNBA game or an NBA game?
NBA.
A lot of people seem pretty sure about that. Yeah.
Like, I don't play basketball. I don't do any of that. But I feel like I dated a basketball player, and she was a basketball player, and she always used to tell me that, like, the difference between, like, men and women was, like, women always had to use, like, so much more, like plays and stuff like that, where men, like, they can jump high as shit and dunk the ball whenever they want to, like, you know, like, body people, like, you don't see that a lot in, like, women's stuff, so you gotta, like, run plays and, like, do all that stuff, like, it's more, like, technical.
Okay.
I feel like.
It relies more, you might say, on strategy than, like, brute physical force or something. Yeah.
I feel like a woman's game is a lot, like, slower than a men's game. Like, men just have a little more speed, so people might be more into that.
Okay. Do we think that's true? Empirically? Or? I don't know. Yeah.
I feel like the NBA has like a lot more like big names. I'm not saying like the WNBA doesn't have big names, but we have like Stephen Curry, LeBron James, Giannis, like it's like players that are really good at what they do. Especially like since like Steph Curry is like the greatest shooter of all time, and Giannis is arguably the most dominant player right now.
Okay. Is it fair that the male players get to enjoy a level of celebrity that the female players don't get to enjoy?
Yes, because the only thing I ever heard from the NWA was the Brittany Griner situation. After that, I didn't hear anything televised about basketball players or specifically women basketball players. But again, like, I'm not a sports person, but like that's the only biggest news that I have ever heard, which is necessarily like a pretty bad thing that she was arrested in Russia or something like that. So that's like the only like thing I've ever heard of the that name. I'm sorry.
I know. It's kind of.
That's like the only thing I ever heard, which is like NBA. It's all this glitz and glamour Hollywood, like like, you know, popularized and stuff like that, but you barely hear anything about the NWA unless it's like publicized in like politics. I mean, in my personal opinion, because again, I only ever heard, I didn't even know like there was like a big basketball, you know, like like another version of an NBA for the woman. Like I didn't even know that.
Yeah. Okay.
I would say, how's that any different from men getting more popularity for celebrities in the NBA versus women getting a lot more popularity in like the modeling side of the thing? Like, it's the exact same thing on the other side of the spectrum.
Are there a lot more female models than male models?
I would say like there's more, but like it's more the thing of like, I don't think I can name a single male model. And like you go into stores and like you see like what, 2 pictures? And like
Okay.
yeah, it's like 90% like the walls are just covered with female models.
Okay.
90%.
Yeah.
I think it also depends on the branding. There's like different companies like Abercrombie and Fitch would have more male models, while other ones that are like more directed towards females, like dresses, prom dresses, will have more female because that's their audience.
Right, but can you name those male models?
I can't, but I don't know any models, so. Yeah.
Going off of that, I think that all goes towards like a business standpoint, as like sports is targeted towards more competition, athletic build, and then going back to the models, women shop more. The shopping industry is based towards women, and that's how they make more money. That being said, I think the NBA would make more money based on ticket sales and the higher competition level based on just their bodies alone. So if I were like a business owner, I would put more money in the NBA because it's projected to make more money in the long run. Why would you put money into like a business that wouldn't make as much? And like logistically, for business owners, they would put their money into something that would make them double what would rather just make them like half of what they put in.
So you can kind of see it's a little bit like a feedback loop, right? Like the popularity of the NBA establishes incentives to invest in it, which then makes it bigger, which then establishes people to invest in that, right? And communication too seems to be a big thing, because I wonder how big the WNBA would get, or how much more their athletes would get paid if it was marketed more, if more people knew about it, if it was in people's faces more, like the NBA is.
I personally don't think it would change anything, because even if you look at men's and women's soccer, like the national teams, the women's team brings in more revenue, more viewership, and they're so much better than the men, and they're still way underpaid compared to them.
Okay, so you think there is some unjust or unfair structure perhaps in place?
Yeah, it's messed up.
Okay.
Because they've had success, like they've won the World Cup and everything. The men, I don't even think they qualified the last time, and they still made more money.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, for the soccer, the way the women's contracts is set up is like everyone on the team gets paid a certain amount, and that's how they got their contract. The men, you only get paid per game, and it's based off the revenue of the entire World Cup. So what the World Cup brings in gets broken down into that, whereas the women have fixed salaries, and they argued for that salary. They had the same structure as the men, but they changed it. Like, I don't remember how long ago it was, but
that's interesting. Okay.
And they also get a lot more like insurance benefits and stuff than the men do as well.
Yeah.
Well, like even besides the pay though, like the women U.S. national soccer team's training, they have to practice outside. Like that is such an outdated way to practice, especially at a professional level. They should be practicing on like a turf field or something that's like a consistent environment, while the men get like $1 million, upgrade almost every year for their team because they just, get more money. They get more upgrades in their equipment. Women, they don't get that. Like they just continually go and they play and they win, but they don't get any like upgrades from that. Men just continually get to practice in this really great facility because they're men, like they just get more.
This brings up an interesting question, which has been, we can even connect it just to the wage gap in general. It has been argued by some that the wage gap exists because women do not negotiate for higher salaries as much as men do. Is that a problem with the system, or is that a problem with women, or neither, or both?
I mean, maybe women don't argue as much for their salary because they get shot down more than men would.
Right? Could be. Do we think that the system is inherently unfair? Is there room for higher salaries for women? Is it likely that if they tried to negotiate for higher salaries that they would get them? In the WNBA perhaps? Or on the women's soccer teams? Or do we think the sport would just like die? Because they'd be like, nah, we're not paying you that. And then...
I think it's possible for women to probably achieve a higher salary, but I think it starts with like how like reporters or like producers like portray women's sports in the media. A lot of male sports, they get a lot of like documentaries about special moments, things of that nature. I feel like if like reporters and like producers were to create like content for women in that light, it would kind of like hype up the sport more, which would create more views.
Yeah, that could be true. Yeah.
I also like going off like the reporters like when the Chicago Sky winning is all I know about the WNBA. But when they won, like we were all over like Twitter about it. It was everywhere, and like all you saw over like on the posts on Twitter is like sexist ass men. Like women shouldn't be playing sports. Like the whole comment section. Like you would scroll down, and they won like 5 minutes ago. Like went on Twitter, and it's all like these women don't know what they're doing. Like fuck women's sports. Like just like sexist ass men like saying some like crazy shit on there, and like that can't feel like great. Like what you don't see that on like men's like sports pages and stuff.
Okay. Yeah, so I feel like we're coming to this idea that what impacts this, what could have an impact on it in the future is definitely the kind of messaging and communication surrounding it, right? There's definitely been an idea that's become a lot more popular in philosophy in recent decades about the kind of discourses that we engage in about society and about people's positionality. That definitely plays a role in all this, right? So let's say this average is 120K. Is the main issue that people have a problem with this the fact that men get paid a lot more? Like, is it relative to men's salaries that people are justifiably upset about this? Or is it just like, is it an immoral fact in and of itself that they get paid this low? Or if men were paid a lot less, it wouldn't be immoral. It would be fine. You see what I'm saying? Kind of.
I think a lot of people think that they just want them to be paid more because it would be unrealistic for them to get paid as much with how much their league brings in, because they just wouldn't be able to afford it. But like I think they just want like higher salaries in general for it.
Okay, so they should be getting paid more, not relative to men's stuff. We can talk about that. We can bring that in later. But like, there is something wrong with the system that is treating them in an unfair way or an unjust way. And they should just be getting paid more because there is more money there, but it's not being given to them. Is that the general sense? So if the average NBA player made 120K, do you think the majority of people would stop talking about this wage gap issue in this domain?
No, it'd just be flipped over. Or it'd be roles reversed. Just a little bit different.
Oh, you think people would start complaining that men should get paid more?
I mean, I don't think like to the extent of this, but a little bit. Like I feel like a couple of men would be upset about that.
Okay.
It just wouldn't be as severe.
Yeah.
I think everyone would be upset about it. You have to pay them what they're worth. If they're bringing in billions of dollars each year, you're not going to pay them that low of a salary.
Okay. Okay, so are you saying there's a problem here? Yes, but there is just a problem in how they're getting paid and how much they're getting paid in and of itself. Okay.
Like you run the numbers, like the men bring in 666,000 times more, and the salaries are 60. Like the men only make like 60 times more on average. So I think if the men's salary was a lot lower, percentage wise, it would just be insane for them to make so low. Like not that there's probably money there for the WNBA for salary increases, but it wouldn't be feasible to have them that close in terms of numbers.
So that brings up an interesting question. If that's true, did you say 660 times more?
666,660, or not that, sorry, 166,666 more, but the salary gap is 60 times.
That's interesting. So if they do bring in that much more money, would we say that the men are being treated even more unjustly perhaps now relative to how much money that they're bringing in? And especially if their salaries went lower, their contracts were lower. Would we then say, oh, they should actually be getting paid a lot more? This is unjust for the men?
Depends on how the breakdown of everything goes, because I didn't look at the breakdown of what NBA contracts are versus how much they spend on advertising and everything versus how much women spend on advertising. That's just the base numbers.
Right.
So it depends on what percentage each spends on revenue and everything, how much money they have left over to pay players.
Yeah. There could definitely be an economic argument made that proportion between, how much the men's salary is higher relative to the women's salary compared to how much they're bringing in relative to the WNBA. One could say, look, guys are actually getting more shafted. But I don't think a lot of people would say that. But it is an argument that could be made, right?
I just think the overall issue is that people don't really care about WNBA. It's just society is really set up for men to be uplifted and put in positions of power where women aren't. That's just really the main issue. It's the
okay, so this is a microcosm of a much bigger issue.
I think so, yeah.
A lot of people agree with that?
Because if you take sports out of it, I just looked up the net worth for Elon Musk is $200 billion, and then I think the owner of L'Oreal, she's one of the richest women in the world according to Forbes. She makes 60, I think it was 76 billion or million dollars. So it's just there's a huge difference within overall, just in general besides sports, the wage difference between the men and women. It's evident, it's there.
Mm-hmm.
How much money does that company bring in versus the other company? Because net worth is all based on assets.
You might also ask, which company is bringing more value to society, perhaps? Which is a difficult question to answer. I'll go to you soon. Yeah.
I just kind of think it depends on what job they have, because a job where it's more dominant things other jobs, teachers, one of the most important things. You see a lot of female teachers, and those are a lot of even it starts in high school, and you see a lot of people go to more guy schools because somebody said it's just a faster pace, it's something more enjoyable to watch than a female sport. But I feel that's what it all comes down to, is just jobs and what's more dominant. But as long as everyone's making money, and if you're making money, it's not they're not living. There's a lot more homeless men than there are homeless women. Even entire vets, they're all on the streets. There's a lot of them. So it's people complain, yeah, we don't make enough money, but why are you complaining if you have a house, you have a roof over your head, you have food on the table? You're alive, aren't you?
I do think the world could do with some gratitude, that's for sure. Yeah. But I hear what you're saying. Yeah.
I was just going to say, this is a little bit off topic, but it's always the richest men in the world and never richest women. And it's going off of what he said men like pretty much are superior in this society, and men typically in the past have inherited everything, and never the women. They're always seen as like the housewife. So that just is like over the years it never really changed. It did, but it's just like that's just how society grew up with. It was just men being in charge of women, especially even now with like the Roe v. Wade overturn. I know that's like very off topic, but like it's just always men has been controlling our society.
Okay. Yeah.
So growing up, I kind of lived in a situation. My parents made the exact same amount of money, dollar to cent, because they owned a business together. But they opened the business together, did everything together, like for equal parts. But my dad passed away in January. So my mom has been running the business with like their other female partner. And there have been so many rumors that my mom's unable to handle the business without my dad. Like simply because of that, because they felt like he was such a big part of the company, when in reality, my dad was sick for a very long time. My mom was doing it herself for a really long time. But just because my mom is female, they were like, she can't handle it, like she's too emotional about it. So like, you know, what does that say about it? That just simply because people didn't even know the situation, didn't know what it was like, they assumed that the company is failing now because my mom is the one running it and my dad's not there anymore. Like I think that says a lot about what people see about women in business and like just generally.
Yeah. I'm sorry you're going through that. That sucks. This gets us back to something that we mentioned earlier, right? About the power of discourse and language. That's why I think it's so important to talk about this stuff, you know, because, well, if we don't have a clear picture of what's going on, if we don't talk about it with other people, if we do see problems, how are we going to change things if we don't do that, you know? Does anybody have any final comments about this? Or questions? Concerns? I'll let you all go a few minutes early here. All right. Well, thank you for coming. Please sign the attendance sheet wherever it is if you didn't get it. Thank you. You too. Have a lovely day, everybody. Thanks. You too.